I certainly feel God's presence after listening to that song. Thank you very much. Beautiful. Our Bible reading this morning is a single verse from the 5th chapter of Matthew. I'll be reading Matthew chapter 5:13. Please follow along as I read. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its saltiness, how will it become salty again? It's good for nothing except to be thrown away and trampled under people's feet. This is the word of the Lord. Jesus was sitting down on a mountain with his followers gathered all around him when he said, "You are the salt of the earth." Some people think you can get a better feeling for what Jesus meant that day if you substitute the word salt with the phrase red hot peppers. So instead of "you are the salt of the earth," you are the red hot peppers of the earth. I know some people don't care for red hot peppers. A little can go a long way. But you've got to admit they really spice things up. They add flavor and zest to your food. Speaking of food, what kind of food do you like? Why do you like it? What makes it so good? I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, and the food up there is not like the food down here. The Italian food is great. My mother's cooking was really good. But when we sat down for dinner in our home, there wasn't really much spice on the food. There'd be some salt and pepper and not very much salt because of my mother's high blood pressure. A few years later, when I was 20, I traveled over to Great Britain. I spent a couple months there one summer. And the food I ate there was far more bland than the food I grew up with. Some of it was good. The fish and chips and a few other dishes were great. But when I got hungry for American food, or maybe Italian food, I was out of luck. They did have it, but the hamburgers were terrible. And the pizza I ordered didn't have much more flavor than styrofoam. The spaghetti and meatballs was even worse. I lost about 10 to 15 pounds in that 2 months, and I was not trying to lose any weight. It simply was because of the food. Years later, when I moved to Texas, I discovered the food in Texas is unlike the food anywhere else. Bland is not a word I would use to describe the food in Texas. Briskets and barbecue, they're bursting with flavor. Cajun seafood and Tex-Mex, they're anything but bland. And almost anywhere you go in Texas, whether it's out to eat or when you're visiting in somebody's home, there's a little bottle of hot sauce on the table. So if your food is not quite spiced up enough for you, you can take care of that yourself. I like spice. It's good. It adds zest to food. It keeps it from being dull and boring and monotonous. Those words, dull and boring and monotonous, they remind me of a funny commercial from probably a couple of decades back. It was a Wendy's commercial. It begins with a comical fashion show, supposedly in the Soviet Union. The setting is dull and it's dark. Everyone's crammed together in front of a small stage when the announcer, a stern-looking large woman in a uniform, says, "It's day fair." And out walks a model, a large woman in a plain gray dress. She walks to the front of the stage. She turns around, walks back off stage as the announcer says, "Very nice." Then the announcer says, "It's evening fair." And out walks the same large model with the same dull gray dress on. This time, she comes to the front of the stage, turns around and goes back, and she's carrying a flashlight in her hands. That flashlight is what made it evening wear. As she walks back off stage the second time, the announcer says, "Very nice," and then says, "It's swimwear." And for the third time, the same large model walks out on stage with the same gray dress to the front of the stage. This time she's carrying a beach ball. So Wendy's is jokingly saying that Soviet fashion is not fashion at all. It was all the same. Everything was dull and gray. No color, no beauty, no joy. Wendy's then contrasts this with their hamburgers, claiming that their hamburgers are full of variety and taste, lots of different choices. You're not stuck with the same old thing, the same old way. With Wendy's, a hamburger can be so much more. Well, with Jesus, life can be so much more. When he walked the face of the earth, the people he encountered, the people who listened and followed, discovered they didn't have to live the same old life, the same old way. Jesus offered new life. He gave people a reason, a real desire to live. He gave people hope. He added color and beauty and joy. He added flavor and zest. Jesus spiced life up and made it better than it had ever been before. A rich young man went to Jesus one day and asked him about how he could have this zesty kind of life he was talking about. Do you remember what Jesus told him? He said, "Go sell what you own, give the money to the poor, and you'll have treasures in heaven. Then come, follow me." That young man was very rich, and he couldn't bring himself to give away his possessions. So he turned and he walked away from Jesus with a sad and heavy heart. That rich young man could have added joy and zest to the lives of many other people. And in the process, he would have found the same for himself. If he could have brought himself to follow Jesus, his life would have been enriched in ways he never thought possible, ways he never could have imagined. In Jesus' daily presence, right? If he's following Jesus, in Jesus' daily presence, he would have found peace and purpose and a passion for life. I read an article about a young man who was rich by worldly standards. His name is Joshua, and at the age of 27, he was the youngest director of operations at a large telecom company out in the Midwest. One day his boss asked him to put together a plan to close 8 stores and to let go of 41 employees. So he did it. The day he handed the plan to his boss, he had 42 names on it, and his name was at the top. You see, 2 years earlier, after his mother died and his marriage fell apart in the same month, Joshua began to reevaluate life. He had a 6-figure salary, an impressive title, and a house full of stuffed closets. But he felt empty. And he felt weighed down by all the things he had, trapped in an 80-hour work week, and stuck in a cycle of consumerism that resulted in him being $100,000 in debt. Joshua had had enough of all of that. So he did what Jesus asked that rich young man to do. He adopted a new lifestyle. Over a period of 8 months, he gave away most of his stuff. He stopped buying things that he didn't need, and he downsized to a 1-bedroom apartment, clearing the clutter from his life so he could make room for the things that truly matter. When one of his coworkers asked him one day why he was suddenly so happy all the time, Joshua realized he was onto something. Once he let go of all the stuff, all the unnecessary things in life, everything else got better. His attitude, his health, his relationships, and his ability to live in a way that was in line with his beliefs. Over the next 5 years after Joshua left the corporate world, he paid off his debt, he lost 80 pounds, and now lives in a small town in Montana where he writes and where his home only has things in it that have a practical purpose and bring him joy. For Joshua, his new life has more flavor and more zest by far. And now, because he spends so much less on himself, he has much more. more money, more time, more energy to add flavor and zest to the lives of others. Joshua has become the salt of the earth that Jesus spoke of. Another salt of the earth story I'd like to share with you begins with an autistic boy in Southern California. His name is Daniel. And from a very early age, he loved to go outside every Monday morning to watch the garbage truck. There he is in his front yard as the garbage truck is pulling up. Like many children with autism, Daniel loves ritual, and watching the garbage truck became a ritual for him. He loved the predictability of the truck's arrival, the predictable movement of the truck, picking up the cans and dumping the trash. The whole thing excites him. So he would wait all week long just for garbage day. One of the truck drivers was a man named Manuel. He was Daniel's favorite because every time he drove up in the truck, he smiled real big at Daniel and he waved at him as he stood there excited in the front yard. One day, Manuel gave Daniel and his parents a huge surprise. After picking up their trash, Manuel parked the truck. He got out and he came around and he asked if he could give Daniel a gift. Daniel was so excited. When he unwrapped the gift, he found a big metal toy garbage truck. He was absolutely thrilled. Manuel, the garbage man, saw an opportunity to bring flavor and zest to the life of one little boy. So he did. That's what Jesus meant when he told his followers to be the salt of the earth. Years ago, I met a man named Jim. He was active in the small country church I served when I first came to Texas. Jim was a real neat guy. He was a retired state trooper. He always had a good story to tell, and he can do about anything he puts his mind to. He built his home with his own hands, the entire thing. And he has a lot of funny sayings, things I never heard before I came to Texas. One thing Jim did for me when I first got to town was drive me around. He drove me past people's homes, told me where they lived, introduced me to the community so that I could find out where things were. And since he'd only been there about a decade himself, he told me what it was like for him when he arrived. The first time he went to church, he said he didn't know what to think. He said he kind of laughed as he told me, "No one talked to me. The people in that church made me feel as welcome as a skunk at a lawn party." A little later, as we drove past an old rundown home, Jim pointed toward it and said, "That's old man Smith's place." Had a smirk on his face. Said, "Don't know why he lives like that. He's got plenty of money. He's just tighter than bark on a tree." And one day when I was in Jim's home outside of town, after a real hard rain, he asked me, "You get much rain in town yesterday?" I said, "No, just a sprinkle." He said, "Well, it came a real frog strangler out here." Jim had some funny sayings. He had his own way of saying things, his own way of doing things, and he was a real big help to me. Not only did he help me get acquainted with the town when I first arrived, but he was quite a handyman. Anyone who can build his own house can do quite a few things. So he would come over to the parsonage whenever I had an issue, fix appliances, woodwork, concrete work, garage door opener, anything. It didn't matter. His wife Jeannie was also real nice, and they were both so good to my kids. That's Jim up there with my two daughters when they were young. Since my kids' grandparents were all out of state, Jim and Jeannie filled in and loved on them, and were the best substitute grandparents any kids could have ever had. Well, Jim, one day, he heard that I bought a new swing set for the backyard, a wooden kit this was. It came with a slide and a climbing rope and some other playthings, kind of like this one up on the screen, although it was bigger and much more heavy duty. And Jim didn't want me to put this together by myself. I told him I'd get it. He didn't need to come over. It It would be no problem at all. He had plenty of jobs to do at his own house. Jeannie had quite a honey-do list for him. But he showed up anyway. It was probably out of love for my kids more than anything else. Since he said he'd known plenty of pastors who didn't know how to turn a screwdriver, I'm guessing he came to make sure the swing set got put together right so my kids didn't get hurt. Jim and Jeannie, they added flavor and zest to life, for my kids and for me. They are the salt of the earth. Like lots of people Jim's age, he had a few health issues. And one day his doctor told him he needed to give up eating salt. Now Jim really liked salt, but he listened to his doctor. He gave it up. The thing is, it made him miserable. He didn't even want to eat anymore. So he went back to his doctor and he told him. And he asked his doctor, is there any way I could eat just a little bit of salt? His doctor said, no salt. He was adamant. So Jim decided to find another doctor. That doctor told him the same thing. So he went to another doctor and another doctor till he finally found a doctor who said he could eat salt. Jim was pretty desperate. You know, there are people all around us who want and need salt. Some are desperate. They're longing for flavor and zest in life. And you, followers of Jesus, you're the people who can help them find it, because you are the salt of the earth. And life in this world, it would be so much better for everyone if more of Jesus' followers took him at his word. You are the salt of the earth. Through you, Jesus can bring flavor and zest to life. Would you please pray with me? Almighty Creator, everlasting God of love and life, we bow our heads asking for courage to be the people Jesus says we are, the salt of the earth, people who can make life better for others. Help us faithfully follow Jesus wherever he leads, so we can find peace, purpose, and a passion for sharing your love with the world. We ask this in his holy name. Amen.